I never thought a single
Is
moment
there
could
anything else
unravel
I
a
can do
life you
for
thought
you?
was yours. But it did. My name's Michael. I'm
I
24,
hope the
living in a
service
town
here
so
is to your
small people always
satisfaction.
ask, why not just leave? I used to think I had everything
You look
figured
like you
out.
could use
A
some
steady
company.
job, a
I was
long-term
hoping you'd say
girlfriend,
that.
a future that was slow but steady. Then I
Is there
walked
anything
into my
else I can get
apartment
for you,
one rainy
sir?
Tuesday and found Rachel, the woman I thought I trusted, entwined
Is
with
there
someone I
anything
once
else
called
I
a
can do
friend.
for you?
No screaming, no throwing things, just the quiet,
You look like
suffocating
you could use some
realization that
company.
everything I
I was
believed in was
hoping you'd
gone.
say that.
That night, I packed a small bag and left without
Is
a
there
word.
anything
I
else I can
drove
do for you?
aimlessly, rain streaking the windshield, trying to outpace the
You
anger,
look like
the
you could use
heartbreak,
some
and the
company.
cold
I
realization
was
that
hoping you'd say
betrayal could
that.
be so calm, so casual.
I
2
hope the
hours later,
service
I
here
ended
is
up
to your
in Seton Hill,
satisfaction.
Colorado, a town smaller than my old apartment building's hallway.
Is there anything
One
else
main
I can get
street,
for you,
one
sir?
diner, a few bars, and enough silence to almost heal, if
You
silence
look
could
like you could
ever
use
heal
some
betrayal.
company.
I didn't plan
I
to
was
stay.
hoping you'd say
I didn't
that.
plan anything until I met her. Her name
Is
was
there
Rachel.
anything else
No,
I
not
can
my
do for
ex.
you?
Another Rachel. 34, sharp, confident,
I hope the
and something
service
about her
here is
made
to
the
your
air feel
satisfaction.
heavier when she walked in. She owned a small bookstore downtown, the
Is
kind
there
that
anything
smelled
else
like
I can get for
coffee,
you, sir?
vanilla, and old paper. She wasn't the type to notice strangers. Yet,
You look like
she
you could
noticed
use
me.
some
I
company.
sat in the corner
I
one
was hoping
afternoon,
you'd say that.
trying to pretend I belonged, when she slid
I
onto the
hope the
stool
service
across
here
from
is
me.
to your
You look like someone
satisfaction.
who hates ordinary days, she said. Her tone wasn't teasing, but it wasn't casual either. I'm not sure, I muttered. She studied me a moment longer, eyes narrowing slightly. Break up. The word hit like a blade. I nodded. I get it, she said softly. People can be cruel. She didn't pry, didn't push. She just sat there, making the silence feel lighter, almost like it was okay to breathe again. Her presence was magnetic. Dangerous, maybe, but safe in a strange way I didn't understand yet. She didn't ask for my story. She didn't need to. Every glance, every small gesture, said she saw more than I let anyone see. Before she left, she touched my shoulder lightly, a fleeting, grounding contact. Don't disappear, she said. People who've been hurt tend to do that. I wanted to argue, to tell her I wasn't the type to vanish. But the truth? I already had, and I hadn't even realized it yet. I didn't know it then, but meeting Rachel wasn't just the start of something new. It was the start of a storm that would pull me back from the wreckage of betrayal, drag me into desires I didn't know I had, and set me on a path towards something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous than heartbreak alone. Something that would teach me about trust, about control, about revenge. And I would learn, very quickly, that sometimes the person who survives betrayal doesn't just move on. Sometimes they strike back. The next day, I found myself back in that little bookstore, though I told myself it was just coincidence. I wasn't ready to talk about my life, not really, but Rachel had a way of pulling you out of yourself without asking. You're back, she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. Her voice had a warmth that made my chest tighten. I needed a book, I muttered, trying not to sound like a fool. She raised an eyebrow. A book? Or an excuse? I didn't answer. I wasn't used to people reading me like a book, let alone someone I'd just met. She laughed softly, the sound lingering longer than it should have. Something in me stirred, something I hadn't felt since the betrayal. She led me to a corner with a small table, lit by a lamp that made everything glow soft and inviting. Sit, she said. Tell me what you like. Or don't. I don't mind either way. I glanced at her, studying how she carried herself. Confident, composed, like nothing could rattle her. Yet, her eyes held a weight, a depth I couldn't ignore. I like quiet, I said finally, and things that make me think. Good, she said, leaning slightly closer. I like people who think. The brush of her shoulder against mine was accidental, or maybe not. My pulse quickened, and I could feel a tension forming, subtle but undeniable. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Small-town quirks, favorite novels, memories of places we'd been. But the space between us felt charged. Her presence was magnetic, pulling me in ways I couldn't resist. At one point, she reached over to hand me a notebook with sketches she'd made of the town. Her fingers grazed mine. A simple contact, but it sent a ripple through me I didn't want to admit. You're different, she said softly, almost to herself. Not like the others who wander in here. You feel things. I didn't know how to respond. The truth was, I hadn't felt alive like this in months. Since my ex, I had been numb. But here, with Rachael, everything stirred again. My thoughts, my senses, even my heartbeat. She tilted her head and studied me, eyes piercing in that way that made it impossible to look away. "Careful," she said quietly. "People like you tend to get hurt." "I've been hurt," I admitted. "Maybe that's why I'm here." Her smile softened, almost sympathetic, yet there was an edge, a hint that she knew more than I did. She didn't touch me again, not yet, but the air between us felt thick, as if any movement could change everything. When I left the bookstore that day, I realized two things. One, I was drawn to her in ways I shouldn't be. Two, I didn't care. And for the first time since my world had collapsed, I wanted to feel alive again. I didn't expect to think about Rachael the next morning, but I did. Every little detail clung to my mind. The tilt of her head, the way her eyes lingered when she spoke, the soft brush of her fingers against mine. It wasn't just attraction. It was something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Desire mixed with fear, curiosity with restraint. Later that week, she texted me, "Come by tonight. I want to show you something." My chest tightened. I knew it wasn't about the thing she wanted to show me. It was about us. About the tension I could feel but couldn't name. When I arrived at her house, the lights were dim, warm against the cold night outside. A faint scent of vanilla and coffee lingered in the air, familiar but intoxicating. She stood by the counter, a loose sweater slipping slightly off one shoulder, and jeans that looked effortless but somehow perfect. "Hi," she said softly, her voice lowering slightly as if she was testing me. "Hi," I replied, my throat dry. She gestured toward the couch. "Sit. Don't be nervous." I didn't sit immediately. I just stood there, noticing the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the subtle curve of her neck, the way she seemed to fill the space without moving. She laughed softly, a low sound that sent warmth straight into my chest. "You're tense," she said. "You always carry the weight of something with you." "I guess," I muttered, finally lowering myself onto the edge of the couch. Her knee brushed mine. I froze, aware of every heartbeat, every little nerve ending. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't meant to force anything. It was deliberate, careful, testing boundaries without crossing them. And I wanted her to cross them. She leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving mine. "You don't let people see you," she said quietly. "Not really. But you let me." I swallowed hard. She was right. I'd spent months hiding, retreating into numbness, building walls I thought would protect me. But with her, it felt like walls weren't enough. She could see past them without even trying. We talked about trivial things at first, but every word, every glance, carried weight. Her shoulder brushed mine again, longer this time, sending a shiver down my spine. My fingers itched to touch hers, to feel that warmth deliberately, not accidentally. "You know," she whispered, leaning slightly closer, "sometimes the people who seem the least damaged are the ones who've hurt the most." I didn't know how to respond. My throat tightened. Everything about her, the calm in her presence, the intensity of her gaze, was pulling me towards something I hadn't felt since ever. Desire, yes, but also trust. Something dangerous, fragile, intoxicating. She laughed softly, shifting on the couch so her leg brushed mine again, this time on purpose. "You're thinking too much," she said. "Just feel it." I couldn't. Not fully. But I wanted to. When I left her house that night, the chill outside didn't matter. My thoughts were consumed by her, by the tension that had built between us, the slow-burning heat that was impossible to ignore. I knew, somehow, this was only the beginning. Something was forming, something neither of us could deny. And I was terrified, but I was also ready. The days after that night felt like walking on a tightrope. Every interaction with Rachael pulled me further out of myself, into something I hadn't experienced since my world fell apart. Her presence was intoxicating, soft yet commanding, and I felt drawn to her in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. We met almost daily after that. Sometimes at her bookstore, sometimes at her small apartment above the shop. She had this ability to make ordinary moments feel charged, laughing at my awkward jokes, leaning just a little too close when we discussed books, letting her hand rest near mine, brushing my arm by accident or on purpose. Every subtle touch ignited something I hadn't realized I still had left inside me. Desire, warmth, and a sense of being alive again. And yet, even in these moments, my mind kept drifting back to her, my ex. The betrayal, the quiet cruelty of discovering her with someone I once trusted. Every laugh, every glance she gave him replayed in my head like a film on repeat. I clenched my jaw, telling myself I wasn't going to act on anything impulsively. Not yet. I had to be smarter, colder, strategic. Rachael noticed the tension in me. Her eyes would linger, soft yet knowing, when my thoughts betrayed me. One night, after a long conversation about art and life, she leaned closer and whispered, "You're not as lost as you think, Michael. You're just waiting." I stared at her, swallowing the lump in my throat. Waiting for what? I didn't answer, but inside I knew. I was waiting for the right time, the right plan. That night, as I left her apartment and walked through the quiet streets of Cedarn Hill, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old messages from my ex. Pain twisted in my chest, but it was sharper now, controlled, focused. Each word reminded me why I couldn't just forget. The humiliation, the betrayal, the casual way she ended what we had. Everything pointed to one truth. She had to face consequences, and I would make sure it was on my terms. But I couldn't rush. Not yet. Impulse was weakness. I needed precision, patience. And Rachael, she was teaching me how. The way she moved, spoke, even the subtle ways she observed people, it was all a lesson. A lesson in reading intentions, in controlling a room, in holding power without revealing too much. I hadn't realized it, but the more time I spent with her, the more I understood I wasn't just being healed. I was being prepared. Later, we sat together on her couch, a thin blanket draped over our knees, sharing a bottle of wine. Our shoulders brushed constantly, our laughter mingled, and I could feel the slow burn of desire building between us. She didn't push, didn't demand. Yet every glance, every sigh, every subtle touch made it impossible to ignore the chemistry. I realized then that the path ahead wouldn't just be about heartbreak or revenge. It would be about transformation, about taking control, about wielding the pain I'd felt and using it, sharpening it like a blade. And I was ready, not only to explore what I felt with Rachael, but also to ensure my ex would never hurt me or anyone else the same way again. The next morning, I woke with a strange clarity. The pain of betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it no longer weighed me down aimlessly. Instead, it had sharpened into focus. Every thought about my ex, the lies, the betrayals, the casual cruelty, was now a tool, a map for what I had to do. Revenge wouldn't be reckless. It would be calculated, deliberate, and utterly precise. I met Rachael at the bookstore that afternoon. Her presence was calming, almost magnetic, but it also made me more aware of the fire simmering inside me. She didn't ask questions about my past or my ex. She didn't need to. Just being near her reminded me that strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, deliberate, controlled. "Coffee?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Her hair caught the light, and I realized I had been holding my breath. "Yeah," I said, following her to the little cafe corner in the store. We sipped quietly for a while, letting the comfort of each other's company settle in. But the tension was always there, underlying, subtle. Every time our knees brushed under the table, every glance that lingered too long, reminded me how much I wanted to lean in, to feel her closer. And yet, my mind wandered elsewhere. Thoughts of my ex, the person who had destroyed me, were constant. I knew she was still living her careless life somewhere across town, unaware that I had survived and grown. The thought made my jaw tighten. Rachael noticed it. "You're thinking about someone," she said softly, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Someone who hurt you." I looked at her, and for the first time, I let the edge of my anger show. "Yeah," I admitted. "And I'm not done with it yet. I'm done being the one who gets hurt." She studied me, her eyes narrowing slightly, sharp and calculating. "And what are you going to do?" I hesitated, then smiled, small and cold. "Wait. Watch. Plan." It wasn't about instant gratification. I needed control. I needed her to feel the impact of her choices, to understand that betrayal has consequences. Rachel's lips curved into a knowing smile. "I like that. Patience. Power. Precision." The way she said it sent a shiver down my spine, but it also reinforced what I had already started to understand. Revenge wasn't just about her. It was about me reclaiming what had been stolen, my dignity, my strength, my ability to act without fear. We lingered in the quiet of the bookstore, shoulder to shoulder, the subtle warmth between us growing with every brush of skin and every shared glance. There was no rush, no impulsive gestures, just the slow, undeniable pull of chemistry, combined with a mutual understanding of power and patience. I realized then that Rachael was teaching me more than comfort or desire. She was teaching me control, observation, how to strike without revealing your hand. By the time I left, the sun was dipping behind the hills, casting long shadows across Cedarn Hill. I felt alive, focused, ready. The plan was forming in my mind. Step by step. Precise. Ruthless, but controlled. My ex wouldn't know what hit her. And as I walked home, I felt the fire of my past betrayals mixing with the heat that Rachael ignited in me. It was only the beginning. I spent the next few days in a strange haze, half consumed by thoughts of Rachael, half consumed by thoughts of revenge. Every interaction with her was electric. Every glance, every subtle brush of her hand against mine made my pulse race. She had this quiet confidence that pulled me in and kept me on edge, a kind of magnetism that made it impossible to think clearly about anything except her and my plan. I started small. Little things, checking her schedule, remembering old habits, learning what she liked, what irritated her. But this wasn't about her. It was about my ex. Every observation, every detail I gathered about her life was a piece of the puzzle. I wanted her to feel the sting of betrayal reflected back at her, but carefully, methodically. That night, I met Rachael at her apartment above the bookstore. The lights were low, and the soft hum of music filled the air. She handed me a glass of wine, her fingers lingering near mine longer than necessary. I didn't pull away. Not this time. "You're tense again," she said softly, perching on the edge of the couch. "You're plotting something, aren't you?" I smirked, taking a sip. "Maybe, but it's private." She leaned closer, just enough that her hair brushed my shoulder. The scent of her, warm, sweet, intoxicating, made my head spin. "I like that," she murmured. "The quiet focus. The kind of control that scares and excites at the same time." I caught my breath. She wasn't just talking about me. She was talking about the fire building between us, the tension we had carefully nurtured. And I wasn't immune. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to close the gap, to feel her closer. But I didn't. Not yet. Not fully. I needed control. I needed patience. Everything in me, every lesson Rachael had unknowingly taught me, told me that rushing would ruin everything. Not just the passion, but my plan. "So," she whispered, tilting her head, "tell me what you're thinking about." I looked at her, letting my gaze linger. My chest tightened as I considered how much to reveal. I didn't tell her about the detailed steps I was planning against my ex. Instead, I let her see only the tension, the edge in my eyes. "You're dangerous," she said softly, leaning even closer, her lips near my ear. I like that. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I could feel her warmth radiating into me, tempting me to forget restraint, to surrender. But I stayed calm, letting the tension stretch, savoring it. We spent hours talking, laughing, and sharing small moments of intimacy. Her shoulder pressed against mine, her hand brushing mine occasionally, the electricity between us undeniable. Every touch, every glance, every subtle motion reminded me that passion could be quiet but overwhelming, controlled but consuming. By the time I left her apartment, the night had deepened. I walked through the empty streets of Cedarn Hill, the chill in the air sharp against the warmth coursing through me. My mind was clear, focused, and relentless. Step one of my plan was taking shape. Patience, observation, precision. My ex wouldn't see it coming. And as I felt the heat of Rachael lingering in my veins, I knew I was ready to strike. Carefully, coldly, and completely aware of the consequences. The fire inside me was no longer just desire. It was purpose. The plan had been forming for weeks, carefully layered and precise. Every detail of my ex's life, every predictable routine, every little flaw I could exploit had been cataloged in my mind. But before I could act, I needed to center myself, to make sure that whatever I did wouldn't be rash or sloppy. Rachael became my anchor. Her presence grounded me, calmed the storm of anger and hurt, and at the same time, stirred a fire I couldn't ignore. That night, I arrived at her apartment with the first part of my plan crystallized in my head. My pulse raced, not only with anticipation of what I was about to do, but with her. She greeted me at the door, her sweater slipping slightly off one shoulder, her eyes glinting knowingly. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. "I've been thinking," I admitted, letting my gaze linger on hers. "About everything." She smiled faintly, almost amused, as if she already knew. "Good thinking. Dangerous thinking." We settled on the couch, the room dimly lit, a bottle of wine open between us. Every brush of her hand against mine, every accidental on-purpose touch, made it harder to focus on anything except the tension building between us. Her shoulder pressed against mine, and I felt the heat surge. I wanted to pull her closer, but I held back. Patience was part of the game, both in desire and in revenge. "You know," she whispered, leaning just enough to let her hair brush my cheek. "You've changed. There's a sharpness now, something you didn't have before." "I've had to," I said, my voice low. "After what happened, I can't afford not to be sharp." Her eyes searched mine, reading the edge in them. "And are you ready to use it?" I nodded, though I didn't specify what it was. She didn't need to know every detail. She just understood the thrill, the control, the careful balance of patience and precision. After a long silence, she shifted closer, her lips almost brushing my ear. "Danger and desire, they go together, you know. You feel it." I felt it. Every nerve in my body was alive. Every glance, every touch, every shared breath between us was a lesson in restraint and intensity. I wanted her, yes, but I also wanted control. And the more she teased, the more I realized how much I had learned from her. Control, focus, observation. Later, when I walked back through the quiet streets of Cedarn Hill, I mapped the first steps of my plan. My ex had routines, vulnerabilities, predictable habits. I could strike without being reckless. I could make her feel the consequences of her betrayal without stooping to chaos. And the thought of it, combined with the memory of Rachel's warmth and subtle touches, sent a thrill through me that was more powerful than anger alone. I was no longer a victim. I was deliberate, cold, calculated. By the time I reached my small apartment, I knew one thing. The next moves would be precise, measured, and unavoidable. And I would have Rachel by my side, not just as a temptation, but as the mirror of control and desire that reminded me what I was capable of. The storm was coming. And this time, I would be the one orchestrating it. I waited for the perfect moment. Precision, patience, and timing, that was everything. My ex had grown careless, predictable. Every post, every casual message, every laugh she left online, all gave me pieces I needed. I wasn't going to rush. I wanted her to feel the weight of my strategy, cold and unrelenting. Rachel became more than my anchor now. She was my mirror, my teacher in subtlety. Her presence reminded me of the power in control, the danger in restraint, and the intensity that could exist without overt chaos. The night I began the first phase of my plan, I stopped by her apartment first. The lights were dim, the familiar warmth of vanilla and coffee enveloped me, and she greeted me with that knowing smile that always left me both nervous and alive. "You look ready," she said softly, passing me a glass of wine. Her fingers brushed mine, lingering just enough to set my nerves alight. "I have to be," I replied, letting my gaze linger on hers. "This is just the beginning." She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't need to. She understood. Rachel had this uncanny ability to read tension, to recognize focus, and to see the fire that burned quietly beneath my calm. We sat on the couch, our shoulders brushing occasionally, and I felt that quiet, irresistible pull between us. Every laugh, every glance, every subtle movement was layered with a tension that made my pulse spike. She leaned closer at one point, resting her head near my shoulder, and I felt the warmth radiate into me. Desire and focus intertwined. I didn't move. I couldn't. Patience was part of the plan. Control was essential. Later that night, after Rachel had gone to bed, I reviewed my notes. Small manipulations, subtle reminders, and carefully timed truths. Each step designed to make my ex feel the sting of her own actions. I wasn't going to humiliate her recklessly. I was going to strike precisely, making her understand the depth of her betrayal and the intelligence of my response. The first strike came through a mutual acquaintance, someone my ex trusted. A casual conversation, just enough to seed doubt, to make her question her own decisions. I stayed in the background, unseen, letting her anxiety grow without revealing my involvement. It was intoxicating, not just the thought of revenge, but the calm, deliberate way it unfolded. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in months. Pain transformed into power, betrayal into strategy. And throughout it all, Rachel's influence lingered. I remembered her subtle touches, her quiet words, the way she had taught me that restraint could be as powerful as action. Desire, strategy, and passion blended, pushing me to act with precision while feeling alive in a way I hadn't thought possible. By the time I finally left my apartment to check on the subtle ripples I'd set in motion, I felt a strange exhilaration. The storm I had been building for months had begun. My ex wouldn't know it yet, but the first threads were in place. And all the while, Rachel's memory, the warmth, the subtle provocations, the tension, reminded me that power could be intoxicating, desire could be restrained, and control could be sexy, dangerous, and thrilling all at once. The game had started, and I was fully awake for the first time in months. The first threads of my plan had done their work. My ex was unsettled, questioning herself in ways she never had to before. I stayed in the shadows, watching as tiny ripples turned into waves. The thrill of control mixed with a quiet satisfaction. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was orchestrating, shaping outcomes with precision. Rachel noticed the change in me immediately. When we met at her apartment that evening, the air between us was charged. Her presence had always stirred me, but now it also reminded me of how far I had come, how strong, focused, and deliberate I had become. "You're different," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes held that sharp glint that always made my pulse quicken. "There's fire in you now, and not just in the way you want me." I smirked, letting my gaze linger on her. "I've been pushed to find it," I admitted. "And I'm not done." The tension between us had grown thicker over the weeks. Every touch, every brush of skin, every lingering glance was an exercise in restraint. Yet, as we sat together, the desire that had been simmering quietly now roared beneath the surface. Her hand brushed mine deliberately this time, a slow, teasing motion that made it impossible to ignore the heat building between us. We talked, laughed, and shared small confessions, each moment layered with subtle intimacy. Her knee pressed against mine, our shoulders touched, our eyes held one another in silent communication. She didn't rush me. She didn't push, and that made it all the more consuming. And through it all, my plan moved forward. Each careful action against my ex was unfolding perfectly. I had set up situations that caused doubt, anxiety, and subtle panic, all without revealing my hand. The satisfaction of watching her unravel, piece by piece, was almost intoxicating, but tempered by the lessons Rachel had unknowingly taught me: patience, control, observation. Later, as we lingered on the couch, she leaned closer, her lips brushing near my ear. "You're thinking about her," she whispered. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. "Yes," I admitted. "And it's working." Her breath hit my neck softly, teasingly, as if she could feel the tension radiating from me. "Careful," she murmured. "Desire and vengeance, both can consume you if you let them." I exhaled slowly. She was right, but I had control now. The heat I felt for her, the power I wielded over my ex, all of it was intertwined. The storm of passion and revenge was a careful dance, and I knew exactly when to lead and when to hold back. When I left that night, the streets were quiet, but my mind was electric. I replayed every step, every detail of the plan, every subtle hint of desire I had shared with Rachel. The pieces were falling into place. Soon, my ex would realize that betrayal comes at a price, and she wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. And through it all, Rachel lingered in my thoughts. The warmth, the tension, the intoxicating pull of desire and control. She wasn't just a witness to my transformation. She was a part of it, the quiet fire that reminded me of my strength and patience, even as the storm I had unleashed began to gather force. The game was reaching its peak, and for the first time, I felt truly alive. It all came together on a quiet Friday evening. Every move I had made over the past weeks, every subtle manipulation, every planted doubt, it converged into one inevitable moment. My ex, careless and unsuspecting, was finally facing the consequences of her own betrayal. I watched from a distance, unseen, as the threads I had carefully woven began to unravel her world. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice, precision over chaos. She had taken from me, and now she would feel the weight of her choices, methodically, without warning, without the messy theatrics of revenge that would make her laugh or cry out. This was strategic, cold, and deeply satisfying. After ensuring the final pieces were in motion, I drove to Cedarn Hill's outskirts, to the familiar warmth of Rachel's apartment. She opened the door, her hair cascading over her shoulder, eyes glinting knowingly. The tension between us had reached a fever pitch. Our touches had grown bolder over the past weeks, every brush of skin a carefully restrained spark that threatened to ignite. "You did it," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. "I can feel it. You're in control now." I smiled, letting the satisfaction linger in my chest. "It's done. The storm has started, and she won't know what hit her." She studied me, her expression softening. Then she stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on my chest. "And you," she whispered, "are still here, alive, burning, dangerous, and irresistible." I felt the weight of the day lift, replaced by a surge of desire that had been building for weeks. Every brush of her hand, every glance, every subtle movement between us ignited a fire I had tried to temper but now welcomed fully. We sank onto the couch together, our bodies close, tension transforming into heat. Her lips brushed mine briefly, testing, teasing, and I responded, finally letting myself succumb to the long-suppressed desire. It was not chaotic, it was deliberate, intense, controlled. Every movement, every sigh, every soft moan was measured, mutual, and deeply consuming. Rachel's hands roamed gently, her touch both comforting and intoxicating, a constant reminder of the control and passion that could coexist. For the first time, I allowed myself to merge power with vulnerability, desire with restraint, trust with surrender. She held me in a way that made me feel alive, seen, and free. As we lay entwined afterward, the city quiet outside, I reflected on everything that had brought me here: betrayal, heartbreak, patience, strategy, and the slow, smoldering fire of connection with Rachael. My ex's downfall was complete, unseen but absolute. And yet, the real victory wasn't in her humiliation. It was in my transformation, my reclamation of strength, control, and the ability to feel fully again. Rachael rested her head against my chest, her breath warm, her presence grounding. "You've changed," she murmured. "And I like who you've become." I smiled, holding her closer, savoring the moment. "So do I admitted softly. "And this us, it's only the beginning." Outside, the storm I had orchestrated raged silently in another life. Inside, in the quiet warmth of Cedarn Hill, I had found control, passion, and the kind of connection that made every calculated step worth it. I had survived betrayal, struck with precision, and now, finally, I was alive in every sense of the word. The reckoning was complete. The fire between Rachael and me had reached its peak, and for the first time in months, I felt whole, powerful, and unbroken.